Wouldn't it be nice if there was an unparalleled digital faith experience that could unite the global body of believers into an online community? Well, now there is. Introducing Faith Social. Faith Social is a robust digital platform that provides a complete menu of resources to nourish spiritual lives in an atmosphere of unity that doesn't require uniformity. They bring the world's Christians together and deliver churches, ministries, and individuals contents that deepen their connection with God and connect them with one another. Faith Social is today's digital faith experience. Check them out at faithsocial.com.
Pastor Miles McPherson, welcome to the Lucas Miles Show.
What's Lucas Miles, Miles McPherson? How you doing?
I think we need to have a show together. Pastor Miles and Pastor Miles.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know if the world is ready for that fully yet.
2 miles.
There's a lot of places we could go with that. So I just want to start by saying this campus is awesome. It's incredible.
Well, thank you. We were told when we were buying it that it would never be a church. And this building is the size of Noah's Ark, 450 feet long and 3 stories high, 45, to exact.
I saw 2 elephants walking in. So
hopefully they were guys.
Yeah. It's really incredible. I mean, the surrounding area, I mean, just beautiful. I heard you say, and I've been listening to the audiobook, and I heard you say, the finest city in the country, and I thought, San Diego's all right. Now I get it after.
Well, it's on all the police cars, America's finest city, and,
wow.
and I came here from New York, and I've been here 36 years, and still after 36 years, I can't believe that it's 70 degrees every single day. I'm waiting for fall, waiting for snow, and it never happens.
It's not happening. My assistant just texted me. It's snowing back home in Indiana right now. So if you ever
too
want to
bad.
come see it, come on over.
Too bad.
All right. So you have a book that just released, which we're going to be talking about here, called The Third Option: Hope for a Racially Divided Nation. I get that right?
You got it.
Okay. And I'm a pastor myself, and in listening to the book, I've traveled all around the world. I have friends of about every color you can imagine. And, I as I listened to that, for me, it was immediately challenging. And I didn't expect that fully. And so kudos,
I get that a lot.
Kudos on that. And I thought that, you just did such a great job. So I want to get into that, but I also want to get into your story a little bit, because I think that's very important even for the content of the book.
Yes. So I grew up in New York, and I have 2 black grandfathers, a black and Chinese grandmother and a white grandmother. And the reason that's significant, that's what caused this, cocoa brown color right here and this relatively straight hair and green eyes. And I grew up in a black neighborhood and went to school in a white neighborhood for the first 8 years of my schooling, from 1st to 8th grade. And so I got harassed in the white neighborhood because I was black, and I got harassed in the black neighborhood because I wasn't black enough. So I was always kind of an outsider in both worlds. My family was diverse, so I was used to diversity. I saw it every day in my family, but I also saw the conflict in the communities, and even in the kids in my community, talking about the kids in the community where I went to school. And even though they made fun and, that's what kids do, they were still my friends. So I saw both sides of both communities and realized they did not know each other, but yet they had opinions about each other. So I was kind of in the middle in several different ways.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. While I was listening to this, I was remembering stories from my own life. And, you kind of redefined what racism even is for me. And can you talk about that a little bit? Like, as we get into this conversation, and it sounds like just a really simplistic question,
right?
But what exactly, if we're talking about, this racial divide, what exactly is racism?
Well, racism is when you see someone that is of a different ethnicity. There's only one race. There's only a human race. So there is no such thing as multiple races, even though we say that, and I say in the book because that's how people understand it. But there's only one race. But racism is when you see someone from a different ethnicity or someone who looks different and you discriminate against them. You think they're less than you. They're inferior to you. They're not as smart as you or not as capable of you, and you treat them as such. Now, there's institutional racism where there are political governmental systems that hold people down. Then there's internalized racism, which a lot of people aren't aware of, is when you get told over and over again that you're less than, you start to believe it. And then therefore you express that racism towards yourself and the people who are like you.
Yeah.
And that's horrible. And I've seen that a lot because, when you get told you're less than or you can't do this, you start to think, how can I get ahead in life? I start to hate the fact that I'm Black, or I deny my Latin culture because it's not accepted. So now I want to be white or what is called American. And so I deny what I am.
Right.
So you start to resent what you are and people who are like you. And then there is personally mediated racism where I just look at somebody who's different and I say, they're inferior to me, or I just don't like them because they tell me I'm inferior to them.
Right.
And so those are the three kinds.
I did a video for the city of South Bend here recently, interviewing some folks that had been around for 50, 60 years in the city and talking about how it's progressed. And specifically, the video was focused on a community center in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And they built this community center in a place where it was a segregated pool previously.
Wow.
And so they kind of established this here as really a sign, a testimony of, this is something we've moved beyond in this. But, for a lot of people, some of those things are just foreign. I mean, I think for me, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, I mean, I can remember a few instances of things. There was a friend of mine, was a Black gentleman, played basketball with him about every day. But when my grandma came up from Alabama, she went and told my mom, do you know there's a Black boy in the driveway? And that for me was like the first time I ever realized that this is still a thing.
Right.
But then as I'm reading your book, I think you did such a great job of talking about how we all have these almost subconscious beliefs.
Biases. Yeah, we all have biases. Yeah. I think one of the big ahas in this book, which by the way is about honor, in every race conversation, it's about us versus them. You always find yourself having to choose a side. And if you listen to the news, you'll hear people talk about, we got to end this us versus them culture.
Right.
But the third option is that we honor what we have in common. So instead of it being my group or your group, the third group is that you and I can realize and acknowledge that we are more similar than we are different. You and I are 99.5% genetically identical. You and I want to have family. We want to pursue our gifts. We want to be in love. We want to eat and enjoy food and enjoy culture. We have more in common than we are different. And more than anything, we're both made in the image of the same God. And the image of God in you is not inferior or superior to the image of God in me. It's the same God. So we are more the same than different. And so the third option is, how can I get past the negative impact of racism in our culture and begin to see you as someone who's more like me than not like me, and enjoy that. So this book is to give people tools to do that. And when you say it challenged you, I'm interested to hear how, because I wanted to write it to give people tools to challenge people, but not to feel like they are attacked, but encouraged and challenged in a positive way.
One of the things that stood out to me is when you talked about this idea that, all skin color is just various pigment of brown. That it's just a spectrum. And I feel almost foolish bringing this up in a conversation about things like race and honor. But when I was a kid, I was always made fun of being called Casper because I was so white, and it was, it was something that stuck with me. I felt like I always had to try to get a tan, but I got Irish, in my blood.
You
so
got problems.
Burn easy and everything else. And so that was a big deal for me as a kid. Now today it would be hard for me to consider that racism in my mind.
Right.
But this idea of just seeing somebody based upon the pigmentation of their skin,
right,
and developing an opinion or insulting them or judging them as a result of this, that it just started messing with my definitions a little bit of that in a good way.
It's funny. My daughter, when she was a baby, she was really pale, and we called her Casper because she was kind of glue. And my son, who's a little lighter than me, we call him Lemonade because he's yellow. We call him Yellow. But yeah, we have all those names, and sometimes people are just being kids. Sometimes they're repeating what their parents said, and you never really know. I think one of the big ahas for me in writing the book was that people can be racially offensive and not be a racist. Now, there are people who are racist, no doubt.
Yeah.
And then there are a lot of people who say they're not.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who say they're not still offend.
Yeah.
So some of those people might be racist and not realize it, but some of them just say things they don't know are offensive, or they don't believe they're offensive, or because people don't believe they're racist, they can't accept that they could ever be racially offensive, because those two things are synonymous.
Right.
And we want to separate those two things in some instances where you may ask me a question, I may say something to you that means I'm not trying to be offensive, but you receive it that way.
Yep.
And if you receive it that way, I need to be aware of that and be sensitive to how your filter. And I think when people read the book, they need to realize, well, maybe there's a blind spot that I have that I talk about where you're unaware of what you're unaware of. And if you can learn about how to approach people differently, more honoring, you could build more relationships, be a better salesman, be a better parent, be a better pastor, a better Christian for that matter. Because you're being more sensitive to how people are receiving what you say. And because if you don't think you can be racially offensive and not be a racist, and if you think you're not a racist, you'll never accept you're offensive. And then the conversation shut down.
You know, that's really the nature of understanding grace, is that we're all messed up. And the moment that self-righteousness starts kicking in to think that, well, I love Jesus, I could never be like that. It shuts down anybody's ability to have any sort of like, hey, I know that you're well-intended, but when you said that, well, no, that was the spirit, brother. It was, you got to get over, just all that, just kind of like what I call uber religious sort of mindsets that develop in us.
Exactly.
There's so many stories from my past have been going through my mind in the last, 24 hours preparing for this. How for your own life, I want to hear a little bit about your story, and then I definitely want to get in some of the practical things that you share in the book and that you guys are also doing, in the release of the third option. But in your story, did you always see yourself as, being able to overcome? Were you the kid in the neighborhood going, I'm going to play in the NFL someday? And, or what was that process for you?
Well, all of us were saying we were going to play that.
I guess I was too, and I didn't have a chance.
Yeah. I think I always believed it. I wasn't the best kid on my football team. I didn't get a Division I scholarship, but I still believed it.
Yeah.
I went to a Division III football school in college, and I said, I'm going to go to NFL, and I did. But at the time, it was like, you're out of your mind, right? Our school was 2,500 kids. No one had been to the NFL. They didn't even have a winning season when I got there. So, it was unrealistic, even though it happened. I went to the University of New Haven, by the way, which is now D2, Division II. But I did believe that I would do something. I wasn't a believer, so God wasn't in the factor. But I have a brother who was a Heisman runner-up. I have another brother who was an 8th ranked boxer. So we were all very athletic since we were real little, and competed in Pop Warner. We were the most valuable players, and in high school we did pretty good. And my younger brother was All-American in high school. I was not. But I was surrounded by success, right? So, and we were very driven. That was true.
You talk about in the book the first time that you saw an NFL contract.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. I mean, my college coach tried out in the NFL as a defensive back, and he was still in shape. I mean, he had tried out like the year before, so he was still in really good shape. And I just idolized Coach Fenton, and he had a party at his house and pulled out. And he brought me in his room and said, I want to show you something. And he pulled out a contract and he said, you can get one of these. And I was a freshman. And I'm like, hey, that's what I'm thinking. Exactly. Yeah. And it was a big deal. And, it didn't matter whether he was white, black, or green. He was believing in me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why one of the reasons sports is so powerful, because we all have a common goal and a common enemy. It doesn't matter what you look like. We're all trying to do the same thing, and we are instantly united. And he showed that to me, and it really gave me a lot of hope and inspiration.
Now, your time in the NFL, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my understanding was, there was a pretty pivotal change in your life while you were there. Can you tell us kind of maybe what life looked like prior to that, and then how things changed after you had that encounter? Right.
I played 4 years with the San Diego Chargers. I was drafted to the Los Angeles Rams and got cut, which means you get fired. You don't get paid. And everybody signs a contract. They bring in about 100 guys to training camp, and half of them get fired. And And so NFL stands for not for long. Those guys can get cut anytime,
Wow.
and usually back then no one got paid after you got cut.
Yeah.
Now some guys got some guarantees, but not all of them. So anyway, I got cut, played for the San Diego Chargers 4 years. My first 2 years I was doing cocaine and smoking weed and chasing women. And then one night I just, it was 5 o'clock in the morning. I had been doing cocaine all night, and I just said, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I committed my life to Christ. I recommitted my life to Christ and stopped doing cocaine that day. Stopped smoking marijuana that day. Got back together with my girlfriend that day. And we've been married 34 years. We got married later that year.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And then I played 2 more years with the Chargers, and then got cut again. I got cut twice from them, one from the Rams. So I got cut 3 times, one for the Father, one for the Son, one for the Holy Spirit. And then I went directly into ministry.
Wow.
Yeah.
How was that shift? I mean, you don't think of most people, they don't get home from NFL and go, let's plant a church. I mean, what did that look like?
Well, after I committed my life to the Lord, between my second and third year, I just started sharing my testimony and doing a Bible study at my house with the kids in the neighborhood.
Nice.
So by the time I retired and got cut the last time, I was doing a Bible study with teenagers and speaking at schools and churches. And I said, I think I could do this. And so I was already transitioning in my heart. And I remember the last year I was playing, my heart wasn't in it, and I just said, I'm done with this. And I didn't have the courage to walk away because it was my dream. And I really couldn't believe I was even feeling that. How could I not want to play football?
Right.
In the NFL, for that matter. And God was just taking my heart out of it. And I remember one day kneeling at practice. We were losing, and it was a miserable season. And I was kneeling in mud. And this little thought came to me, said, you're 25 years old and you're kneeling in mud. Now, normally you think, what's wrong with that? and I said, why does that not resonate with me anymore? And it was just God saying, you're done. And then the season ended, and I got cut going into the next season. And that was it. I never got another job offer, and I went into ministry making $125 a week. After making $9,000 a game.
Wow.
So, and I said, when I got offered that job, in an instant, God said, are you going to do it for the money? You're going to trust me? I said, I'll take the job. And God is taking care of us.
Wow. Now, let's talk about the church here for a minute. I think that's a good transition. How long have you guys been here now at Rock?
We started this church in the year 2000, so 18 years, going on 19 in February. We have 5 campuses. One of the things that I'm most excited about is all the volunteer ministries in the community. We do over $5 million worth of volunteer service for our city.
Wow.
And so we have a lot of great people, and it's a very diverse church. So a lot of great people all around the city, in 118 zip codes that make up San Diego, volunteering in some form or fashion. And that's what's really exciting about to me.
Now, there's a pretty eclectic mix here, if we're talking about diversity and race.
Right.
What does that breakdown look like here on the campus?
I wrote in the book 48% white, 34% Latino, 14% Black, 2% Pacific Islander, something like that. It's really just mixed, and that's the makeup of the people who took the survey the day we did the survey. It's the United Nations, and I wouldn't even I don't even know how many different kinds. I preached a sermon in Spanish 6 months ago, and we did a service to launch it, and we had 15 Latin countries represented in the launch, the vision casting for the sermon that I did for the regular Sunday. And so we just had the side services, Vision Night, and there were 15 Latin nations. That's just the Latin nation. So I don't know how many nationalities, but it's a little bit of everything, and then a bunch of mixed people like me that have a bunch of nationalities in them.
How do you guys have done you've had some pretty intentional philosophies, I think, with the ministry that's created sort of this environment, this ecosystem that seems to have really thrived across multiple demographics and diverse people. What are some of those philosophies that you guys have held to that have created this place into what it is?
We have a outreach philosophy called Do Something Church, and it's based on 4 things that Jesus did while he was in his body. So Do Something Church does it count, walk, ask, love. And count is take a numerical assessment of the pain in the community. So how many strip clubs, how many homeless, how many kids in foster care? Those are numbers, and every number represents a family, a person in the family, and a whole network of people. How many people are killed every year in your city or raped? And those are people that represent pain. And then you walk to them. Jesus walked everywhere. Obviously, he didn't have a car, but he also didn't sit in the synagogue and say, come to me.
Yeah.
He went to them. And then you ask, how can I help you? You ask blind Bartimaeus, what can I do for you? In Mark chapter 10. And then you love, which is the greatest commandment. So if we take a numerical assessment of the pain, where are the homeless people? Okay, you can count them and you know where they live. Let's walk to them.
Right.
Let's ask them, how can I help? A lot of times as believers, we're telling people what they need to do versus saying, how can I love you? How can I help you? And then we respond in love. So that's what we are constantly doing. If you watch the news or drive around, just ask, man, who's hurting and where are they at and how can we help them? And if we took that posture, a lot more people would say, come here, and you can help us.
I just have a few more minutes here on this first episode, and then I want to, second episode, make sure listeners tune back in because we're going to be really diving in to the material in this book and specifically some of the practical takeaways, which I don't think every book always has.
Yeah.
There's a lot of philosophy out there. I felt like you did a great job of presenting both the philosophy and where do we go now that we see this.
Exactly.
And if you could speak to that the person out there, maybe they're a pastor trying to find ways to engage with their community more, or maybe there's somebody who's been minimalized, in life because of some of these racial divides that exist. What would be your kind of final takeaway for them here today on this episode?
So if it's a pastor, I would stand on the stage Sunday and ask himself, am I ministering to everybody? Well, one, what does my congregation look like? Because if everybody looks the same, then there are people in unless that neighborhood looks like your church. Because if you live in an all white, all black neighborhood, or the geographic area from which you minister is all one thing, there's really not a whole lot you can do. Some people just target neighborhoods of people who look like them. Okay. We don't want to do that. I would challenge the pastor, does my neighborhood look like the geographic area that God has given me? And if it doesn't, then I would challenge the pastor to go start to meet people in those neighborhoods and expand the breadth of the impact of his ministry. If your church is diverse, then I would ask, are you ministering to the needs of all the people in your church? And how do you know? I mean, do you know what the blacks or the whites or the Hispanics or the Asians, what their needs are? Is your message purely the gospel, or is it political, which is definitely going to split your church, which I would encourage pastors to stay away from. But I think, are we ministering the kingdom of God to all the people that God has given us access to? That's got to be the big question, because we represent the kingdom of God. And when people look at our church, do they see a group of people that love people, or they just love some? Sunday morning is the most segregated time of the week. And, when as non-believers looking at the church going, they're divided more than us. Yeah. and I'm sure that breaks his heart.
No, such a great message, and I can't wait to get back into the second episode. So thanks for listening today, and Pastor Miles, thanks for joining us on the Lucas Miles Show.
Good. Get the book, Amazon.com, everywhere books are sold.
Also, we'll have all that in the show notes, and definitely pick this up. Highly recommend it. And as I mentioned, I've been listening to the audio version on Audible, and you read it yourself, which is enjoyable.
Oh my gosh, it took me 19 hours. I almost wanted to jump off a bridge after that. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So especially listen to it to make this man's pain worthwhile. Thanks for listening today.